I listen to a lot of podcasts and audiobooks, and I was looking for my next listen. I stumbled upon this guy. His name is Edward E. French. He's a professional makeup artist, and he also reads audiobooks and some of the public domain books he puts on YouTube for free. One title in particular caught my eye: Varney the Vampire. Now, that name sounds ridiculous. What kind of a name is Varney for a vampire? Well, it turns out it's quite an influential vampire story from the 1800s. It came out 50 years before Dracula. The story invented a lot of the tropes associated with vampires. Varney has fangs, leaves two puncture wounds on the necks of his victims, comes through a window to attack a sleeping maiden, has hypnotic powers, and has superhuman strength. He's the first known example of a sympathetic vampire in literature, a vampire who despises his condition but is nevertheless a slave to it. He doesn't look that sympathetic there. He totally looks like he's about to smack that poor young lady in the face. Interestingly, Varney can go around in the daylight and has no particular fear of crosses or garlic. Now, Wikipedia tells me that Varney is an example of a penny dreadful. I've heard that term, and I think I can guess roughly what it means, but what exactly is a penny dreadful? Well, it refers to a kind of serialized story published in the 1800s. New chapters were released every week, and each chapter was about 8 to 16 pages, and they cost a penny. Dreadfuls because of their lurid, sensational subject matter. Penny dreadfuls were a phenomenon in Britain. There were hundreds of publishers. They were printed on cheap paper, and the stories were aimed at young working class men. They also had, like a lot of literature at the time, really cool woodcut illustrations. A woodcut is what it sounds like. An artist would design a picture, and then a craftsman, usually somebody different from the artist, would carve out the image on a block of wood. And that block of wood has ink added to it and is used to stamp out the illustrations on paper. Serialized literature was a whole thing in Britain at the time. The novels of Charles Dickens were originally sold in serialized form, although his chapters cost a shilling, which is 12 pennies a chapter, as opposed to a penny for the penny dreadfuls. Some penny dreadfuls were cheap knockoffs of Dickens. Sure, you've heard of Oliver Twist, but have you read Oliver Twist? You might be familiar with Nicholas Nickleby, but what about Nicholas Nickelberry? Dickens was outraged that he was being ripped off and took one of the publishers to court and lost. The judge argued that nobody could possibly confuse the penny dreadful version with the real version because the penny version was so inferior looking. And judging by this illustration, they were definitely inferior looking. Your kid could probably do better. I actually love these woodcuts. Even when the art is terrible, it's terrible in an interesting way. The most famous character to come out of a penny dreadful is Sweeney Todd, the demon barber of Fleet Street, who murdered his victims and they were turned into pies. He first appeared in a penny dreadful called The String of Pearls. He went on to become the star of a successful musical in the 70s by Stephen Sondheim, as well as a movie in 2007, which I haven't seen, but according to Rotten Tomatoes, it's pretty good. In the 1850s, publishers targeted even younger readers with periodicals with names like Boys of England, Boys Own Paper, and Up to Date Boys. Often they cost only a halfpenny, and I believe that's pronounced halfpenny in England. In 1866, a clergyman named John Erskine Clark launched a periodical called Chatterbox. It was filled with heartwarming stories such as heroic dogs saving drowning children. It cost only half a penny, and it was originally designed to fight against the corruption of the penny dreadful and was still published up until 1955. Just as rock music, video games, and cell phones have all been blamed for corrupting the youth, penny dreadfuls were blamed in their time for the shameful state of the young people of the day. However, H.G. Wells, who knew a thing or two about a good story, disagreed. He said of his love of penny dreadfuls when he was a boy, "Ripping stuff, badly illustrated, and very, very good for us." Even though they were immensely popular at the time, we don't have a lot of surviving examples of penny dreadfuls. They were cheap and printed on cheap paper, and they were intended to be disposable. We don't even know for sure who wrote most of them, as the authors were often not credited. By the start of the 20th century, penny dreadfuls were on the way out, replaced by tabloids such as the Illustrated Police News, once voted the worst newspaper in Britain. But looking at this picture, I think someone misspelled the best newspaper in Britain, because for 1896, those ladies are showing some skin there, and I totally want to read about the alarming experience of fair bathers who are attacked by an octopus with crazy, creepy puppy dog eyes. Anyway, certainly some penny dreadfuls remain in their entirety. Varney the Vampire is still around. I don't know that I will actually end up reading Varney the Vampire. The author was paid by the line, so it's 232 chapters long. I'm interested, but maybe not that interested. I hope you've maybe learned something about penny dreadfuls, or at the very least enjoyed some super interesting wood carvings. If nothing else, I certainly encourage you to do an image search on penny dreadful woodcuts. They are weird and fascinating.